What makes a super boss as opposed to a boss? My definition, the way you can really think about it, is a super boss is a leader that helps other people accomplish more than they ever thought possible. And as a result, those people end up finding their careers accelerating, turbocharged, if you will, to create so that they have many new opportunities in their own careers. This is a boss that really makes it their business, directly or indirectly, to accelerate your own career. And in a way, it's the classic definition of what a leader is. A leader is someone who creates other leaders. That's what superbosses do.
That is Sydney Finkelstein, the Stephen Roth Professor of Management and Faculty Director of the Tuck Executive Program at the Tuck School of Business at Dartmouth College. He's also the Faculty Director of the Center for Leadership at Tuck. His specialty is business leadership and strategy. In this episode, Professor Finkelstein is going to talk about something we all need and, quite honestly, wish we had, and that is superbosses. But what exactly is a superboss and how do they differ from traditional bosses? We're going to explore that in more depth, as well as look at how to become a superboss, the different types of superbosses, and if these mythical leaders are actually born or if they are made. This episode was recorded a few years ago, but I'm bringing it back in a post-COVID world because superbosses are something we need now more than ever.
A superboss helps other people accomplish more than they ever thought possible. Well, there are a lot of ways to get there. And you could have, your softer touch kind of traditional person many people might think of, but you can also get the really tough, challenging boss, the Larry Ellisons of the world. And what's interesting about them and makes them tick is they understand that to win, you need the world's best talent, the world's best teams. They have that insight.
The world is changing quickly. What do you need to know and do in order to be successful now and in the future? From leadership to the future of work to employee experience, this show will give you the insights and the tools you need to succeed and thrive professionally and personally. Make sure to follow me on Spotify or subscribe to the show on your favorite platform. You can do so easily by going to futureofworkpodcast.com. Also, please rate the podcast on Apple Podcasts or whatever your preferred platform is. It really helps spread the word about the show, and I personally appreciate it. Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Future of Work podcast. My guest today is Professor Sydney Finkelstein, who is the author of Superbosses, How Exceptional Leaders Master the Flow of Talent. He's also the Stephen Roth Professor of Management and Faculty Director for the Tuck Center for Leadership at Dartmouth. Sydney, thank you very much for joining me.
Great to be with you, Jacob.
So you have this really kick-ass book that just came out, and I was very fortunate enough to be able to get to take a look at one of the advanced copies, which was phenomenal. I think out of all the leadership and business books that I've read, this is definitely one of the ones that I put up on my list. And today we're going to spend a lot of time talking about superbosses and what makes some leaders truly exceptional. But why don't we start with some background info about you? So what's your career history? What do you currently do at Dartmouth? And where'd you get this idea for the book?
Yeah, so I've been here at Dartmouth for 22 years in beautiful New Hampshire, and I grew up in Canada. Moved to New York and LA for a number of years for graduate school and some other work, and then ended up in northern New England. And I'm on the faculty, as you know, and do a lot of research on leaders, on CEOs, on executives, as well as a lot of consulting and speaking and some executive coaching. And the idea for the book came up because one of my hobbies is I'm a real foodie. I'm really into great restaurants, and I love to cook as well. And one of the things I noticed in the restaurant business is how common there was this pattern of sous chefs getting moving on to new restaurants and becoming senior chefs in their own right, and kind of a passing of the baton, if you will, learning from somebody who they worked with for a number of years. And it turns out that it is, in the restaurant business, pretty common to see that. But I still thought it was cool about how that happened. And I looked at one in particular, one chef and restaurateur in particular, who was Alice Waters. And Alice, is, as many people will know, is the founder, the chef and the impresario at Chef Hannis restaurant in Berkeley, California. And it's the restaurant that really brought farm-to-table organic food, local sourcing of high-end, high-quality ingredients, brought that into the more of the mainstream of America. And today, there's virtually no higher-end restaurant that doesn't have this as kind of a core value or principle. And if you look at the number of people that worked for Alice at Chef Hannis over time, and then moved on to open up their own restaurants or their own bakeries or what have you, and it's a gigantic number. And it was just such an interesting pattern that, in a world of, in an age of big data, that one person could have such a huge influence on the development of a generation of talent.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So also really quick, Sydney, are you a little bit farther away from your microphone? Because you sounded a little bit better earlier.
Well, I'm right next to the microphone.
Now you sound great.
Even better. Wow.
It wasn't possible, but now you do even sound better. So I actually live in Oakland, not too far away from Chez Panisse, and my wife and I were there for Valentine's Day last year. And so it's a great restaurant. I totally understand everything you're saying. So you were eating there, and then you kind of just got this idea for the book, or did you kind of do some research after that, or where did the inception for this further research and writing a whole 300-page book come from?
Well, I saw that pattern I described, at Chef Panisse, and I was curious about whether there were other industries that had the same type of pattern. And so I looked at the National Football League, and it turns out when you look closely at American football, you discover that Bill Walsh was this incredible generator of talent, from former head coach of the San Francisco 49ers. And actually, if you look at there's 32 teams in the NFL in the beginning of this past season. Out of those 32 teams, 20 of their head coaches were part of the Bill Walsh Tree of Talent, which means they either worked directly for him or they worked for someone who worked directly for him. It's kind of an incredible impact. And so I started poking around and looking at different industries, and I looked at advertising, I looked at comedy, fashion, hedge funds, music, industry after industry. And it turns out in every industry I found the same pattern, which is that there was this one person that had this outsized influence in the development of talent. And that's what got me going. I said, wow, this is a cool thing. Let's try to figure out what's going on.
That's a fascinating road that you took. How long did all this take from idea to actually getting this book done?
Yeah, well, it took a long time. 10 years in total.
Oh, my goodness.
Because, if that's all I was doing during those 10 years, it would be rather unimpressive, I think, to take that long to write one book. But I was doing many, many other things, and I wasn't really sure that this would end up being what it's become. But the longer and the more time I spent on it, the more fascinated I became. And then you start telling people, what are you up to? And I tell them, I'm studying these people like Bill Walsh and Alice Waters and Ralph Lauren and Lorne Michaels and George Lucas. Everybody wants to say, what are you finding out? That's fantastic. And so, over time, you really get into it.
Yeah, well, hey, the book turned out great, so big congratulations to you on that. So why don't we start talking about some of the themes in your book? And the first question I have for you is, your book is about superbosses, but what is a regular boss? And how do you make the distinction between a boss and a superboss? So
we know what a boss is, of course. Everyone's had them and has them, and probably many, if not most people, are bosses themselves. But what makes a superboss as opposed to a boss? My definition, the way you can really think about it, is a superboss is a leader that helps other people accomplish more than they ever thought possible. And as a result, those people end up finding their careers accelerating, turbocharged, if you will, to create so that they have many new opportunities in their own careers. And that's different than your typical boss, and I think it's kind of obvious for a lot of people who may not have had a boss like that. This is a boss that really makes it their business, directly or indirectly, to accelerate your own career. And in a way, it's the classic definition of what a leader is. A leader is someone who creates other leaders. That's what superbosses do, and that's different than most bosses. Some might be down that path a little bit, but most bosses are much more narrowly focused on whatever they're getting the job done, whatever their performance needs to be. Superbosses are a little bit broader than that.
Got it. So it sounds like a boss would be kind of like you said, the stereotypical manager, command and control, fear-based management, kind of cracking the whip, so to speak. And the superboss has a vested interest in making sure that his or her employees actually succeed and possibly become superbosses themselves. And the term servant-based leadership comes to mind when I think of superbosses. So that seems to be kind of the direction that you're going with as far as what is a superboss.
It is partly true, I think, that there is this kind of servant-based leadership that's part of this, but it's not the whole thing, because the truth is that some superbosses are really tough characters, and they care, frankly, about themselves more than they care about anybody else.
I was going to ask you about that later.
Servants. Sorry to jump ahead a little bit, but some of them are really tough characters. But they have a different motivation that makes them click. But many of them do think about legacy, do think about being real nurturers for those for their proteges, for their people.
So if you had to think of some kind of key traits, how do you spot a superboss? What do you look for? I know one of them is sort of your proteges and making sure that your proteges are successful. And if you have a great number of successful proteges, that's definitely a factor. What are some of the other things that you look for in identifying a superboss?
Yeah, it's a terrific question, Jacob, because many people want to know, how do you find one of these people? They sound great. I want to work for them. How do I find her? And there's a few things you can do. Of course, the first thing is that they will have this track record developing other people, and that's something that even when you're in an interview with your prospective boss, you can actually ask about that in a very unthreatening way, just by asking something like, over the years you've had a lot of people working for you, and I'm just curious where they are today and what they've been doing. And then you listen carefully, and is there a story about, this one went there, this other person that accomplished that, or is there an answer that says, I have no idea where they are, or some such thing. You want the superboss is the person that's going to be thinking about, is going to stay in touch, going to know about a lot of the talent and the great talent that they had. So you can look for it. What else should you look for? Some of the markers, let's say, of a superboss. Superbosses really do get in the trenches with their team members, with their employees. They are involved. They're not going to be sitting in the ivory tower. They're not going to be sitting in the corner office all by themselves. They very often like to co-locate, in fact, with their team, with their employees. They will appear unannounced at your cubicle desk or at your office door or what have you, to talk to you, to work with you. They'll be very present. They're not the type of people that like to or let themselves get locked into endless meetings from, how so many people get scripted from morning to night with this meeting and that one and this one.
Oh yeah.
I know we're not going to get rid of meetings. That would be quite a trick. But people that let their calendars get controlled by others and by these meetings, generally are not superbosses, because superbosses want to have this kind of organic opportunity to interact with people, to teach people, to see what people are doing so they can push them harder and better. And you can't do that if you let yourself get locked up with a schedule or in the corner office. And in each of these instances, it gives up some of that flexibility. That's one of the hallmarks of superbosses.
Now, you identified, I think it was 18 superbosses in your book, right? Who are some of these superbosses?
Well, There are a lot of them, and I did look at 18, and these are the ones that are among the most prominent of all superbosses, and they include Ralph Lauren in fashion, George Lucas in obviously film, but in the case of George Lucas, even more so in digital technologies that are used in film and special effects, really. Norman Brinker, who founded the Chili's restaurant chain and Steak and Ale and Brinker's International, and many of his proteges even today are running many of the multi-unit restaurant chains around the country, P.F. Chang's and Lone Stars and all the rest. Julian Robertson from Tiger Management and Hedge Funds. Tommy Frist, who was the longtime CEO of Hospital Corporation of America, and has so many of his former employees that are major players in that industry. Lorne Michaels from Saturday Night Live. I mean, the list goes on. A lot of household names in there.
Now, some of the guys, and you kind of touched on this earlier, some of the people, I think you had Steve Jobs in there, you had oh my God, why am I blanking on his name? Ellison, what's his first? Larry Ellison. I was trying to, you said Lorne Michaels, so I was like, Lorne Ellison, no, that's not right. So yes, Larry Ellison, Lorne Michaels, Steve Jobs. Some of these guys, and you touched on this earlier, are pretty brutal, and we've heard stories about how some of them are very hard to work for. They can be very tough. People sometimes refer to them as I don't want to curse, a-holes and jackasses. So how can they be super bosses if maybe sometimes they don't always get this great reputation, if they're so tough, if they're so hard on you? How does that fit in with it?
Yeah, well, remember that a super boss helps other people accomplish more than they ever thought possible. Well, there are a lot of ways to get there. And you could have, your softer touch kind of traditional person many people might think of, but you can also get the really tough, challenging boss, the Larry Ellisons of the world. And what's interesting about them, and by the way, I call them glorious bastards, and both words I think are accurate.
Yep.
What's special about them, what makes them tick, is they understand that, take a step back. They want to win. They're all about winning. That's certainly true for Larry Ellison from Oracle. And they understand that to win, you need the world's best talent, the world's best teams. They have that insight. That's not necessarily the case for everybody out there who wants to win. There are people that will go about simply exploiting other people, don't care about anyone else, want to surround themselves with yes men and yes women. Glorious bastards are not like that. They care so much about winning that they just want to make sure that they've got really great around them. And if they're not, but they have that potential, they want to help them get there because that helps them accomplish their own goals at the same time. And so they'll push you, they'll challenge you, to be sure. And it's not always an easy thing to work for some of these glorious bastards, but if you can handle it, the upside is gigantic. You think about, you bring up Larry Ellison. Look at some of the people that worked for him over the years: Craig Conway and Ray and Mark Benioff, the CEO of Salesforce.com today. I mean, a lot of big time players that cut their teeth working for Ellison, that learned how to run a business working for Ellison, and went on to great success.
Yeah. No, I mean, you make a great point. And you actually touched on this just briefly, but you didn't cover all three categories. So you had, I think, three categories of super bosses, right? You had iconoclasts, you had the glorious bastards, and you had a third category. Can you talk about what those three categories are and what's different about each one?
Yeah, absolutely. So the difference among these three categories is motivation and motivation of the superboss. Why is a superboss doing what superbosses do? What makes them tick to do that? And in looking at all these different superbosses that we studied and talked to and learned about, they tended to fall into these three categories of motivations. And the first is the one I just mentioned about glorious bastards. Why do they do what they do? Because they want to win, and therefore they need the best people. The second category are people I call nurturers. They nurture other people. Why do they do what they do? Because they feel it valuable. They gain personal enjoyment and value out nurturing, out of helping other people. They're the ones that are maybe closest to what many people think about as mentors, but they're not just your run-of-the-mill mentors. They're almost like super mentors, if you will, because they do much more than your typical mentor. And people in that category are Norman Brinker, from again Chili's and Brinker International, the restaurant business, and Tommy Friss in the hospitals business. And then the third category are, as you say, iconoclasts. These are the creative types. These are people that end up, if you work with them, you end up getting much better, almost in a very organic fashion, just by interacting on a day-to-day, regular basis. And so some of the real creatives are Ralph Lauren, of course, in fashion, and Lauren Michaels. Maybe one of the maybe the most unusual of all of the Superbosses is Miles Davis, the jazz genius, and people would be attracted to work with Miles Davis because of that genius. And he would love to have younger, less experienced people around him that had a spark, because that helped push him, that helped him get better. And so that type of kind of organic interaction with iconoclasts makes everybody improve and extends or expands the creative process. So those are the three types: the glorious bastards, the nurturers, the iconoclasts. Each of these categories different in terms of what kind of makes a superboss tick. But the remarkable thing is, when you go and look at what they do, it's really very similar, and that was really one of the interesting surprises of doing this research.
Were there any, I guess, executives at organizations that you looked at that are maybe well known that you wouldn't consider a superboss?
Well, I don't want to say that there's only one path to success in an organization. I like the Superboss path. I think it makes a lot of sense, but not everyone is going to be who's successful is necessarily a Superboss. And I didn't go out to study, and this is actually important. I didn't try to figure out what explains success. I wasn't interested in that as much as I was interested in these superbosses that are successful, but at the same time do this other thing, which is help other people get better. So probably there's lots of people out there that are hard drivers and perform well, do well, but are not necessarily superbosses.
Yeah.
So I can't kind of tell you a bunch of them because I didn't really talk much about them or was all that focused on them. But I suspect that there are some. I think it's the hard way to do it, I should say. Just working and grinding it out is a harder way to make it than it is, in my view, than it is by surrounding yourself with great people that help you get better. It sure seems like a better path and a more enjoyable path, but not everybody takes it.
Yeah, and I'm also assuming you didn't go out and speak with every single executive in the world, right? That would keep you busy.
Yes.
But I'm thinking of people like CEO of Microsoft, CEO of Cisco, CEO of Pepsi. I'm just wondering if and I'm sure there are plenty of executives out there that, like you said, are successful, but maybe don't fit into that superboss category. So I think that's a great distinction that you make. So I'm glad you made that one. Now, out of the three categories that you looked at, were you finding that there are more superbosses that fall into one or the other? Is one of them like a rare breed and the other ones are more common?
I don't think so. I don't think any of them are rare. I would say maybe more will fall into the nurturer category than the other two, but it's not like, say, out of the 18, it's not like there were only one or two in any category. It's more like 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 in each one of these categories. So and that makes sense to me because there's different ways to go about this. And again, the glorious bastard, the really hard-nosed CEO or executive or any boss, any manager. They have a different way to do it, but I think everyone who's worked has seen some tough people. Not all of them are super bosses. But the ones that are tough and that at the same time give you that great opportunity, those people are like gold. That's why I say, you shouldn't be judging your boss on the basis of whether or not she or he is tough or not tough. That's not what it's about. It's whether they help you get better. And if it's about being tough, it's got to be a fit for what you are comfortable with and what you can handle. But there are different ways to get there. So, I think all three are present all over the place in lots of organizations.
I think it's also important to, sometimes I feel like employees tend to look at managers as friends. Sometimes they want managers or executives to kind of be more. But I think the reality is, like you said, the people that are tough, they're not there to be your friend. They're not there to kind of be your parent. They're there simply to help you succeed. And if that means that they're going to be hard on you or tough on you, you shouldn't look at it as, this boss is tough on me, he's hard on me. You should look at it as, is he making me more successful? Is he helping me become more successful? That's probably the right question that we should be asking, right?
Yes, absolutely. And it's not about being friends. Of course, that could happen. That's fine. The actual relationship that's maybe more common between some of these super bosses and their proteges, they do get close. They do form a bond because they know, if you're working for somebody like that, you know how important she is or he is to your career and what they're doing for you. And so it's closer to, I don't know whether I would say, mother, daughter, or father, son, or some such thing, but there was a real kind of, emotional bond that sometimes forms between the boss and the subordinate and the team member that was, striking. And, I interviewed hundreds of people for this research, and in more than a few of these interviews with proteges, former employees, of a super boss, they would talk about this type of connection, and super bosses, I think, recognize that, and they benefit from that. You think about all the people who work for Lorne Michaels at SNL, and I talked to a whole bunch of them, and they're famous people, so you see them on TV also, and their respect and loyalty and feeling towards Lorne Michaels for what he created for them, what the opportunity gave them is really palpable. It's really important. And this is also really interesting, Jacob, even for some of the glorious bastards. They treat you really rough and tough, and you make it through, and then you move on and do something else. And even in some of these situations, there was one who was really remarkable. Larry Ellison, one of Larry Ellison's proteges, and I don't know that I quoted him by name because he didn't want to have his name quoted, but he in my interview with him, he said, we had a falling out. I left. We had a falling out. It was in the newspapers. It was a big mess. And I haven't talked to Larry in, I don't know what it was, 10 years or 15 years. But he said to me, I sometimes wish I can just go back, over to his house and have a beer and talk and show some pictures of our kids and just kind of hang out again with them. And this is for someone who felt like he was probably mistreated by his super boss, just in terms of the harsh relationship that formed. But they still have that bond. It's really remarkable.
Yeah, that is actually quite interesting. And you mentioned Lorne Michaels. He's notoriously known for not being, I don't want to say easy, but he's a tough guy. I mean, he really runs his ship tight, and it's. I think you make a great point that people still have an enormous amount of respect and admiration for the opportunities that he's created for so many people. But at the same time, he is by no means, I don't think anybody would say he's easy or he's, soft or pushover when it comes to being a boss. So that's, it's interesting. We keep hearing a lot about, different organizational structures, things like holacracy, flat companies, where people think that maybe hierarchy will dissolve a little bit. How does this concept of a super boss fit in with a corporate structure that maybe is not as hierarchical? So can you still have a super boss in a in a flatter type of organization, or does the concept of superboss depend on somebody being below you, of you having subordinates, of you telling other people what to do?
Yeah, it's a good question. I suppose if you have a company or any organization where everyone is exactly the same level, then by definition you have no boss. So how could you have a super boss? So I say that, but then I think, well, you're always working with other people. And so some of the superboss behaviors or actions about being innovative and being a teacher and other things like this are still very relevant. But then I also think about some of the superbosses who purposely try to break down hierarchy in their organizations.
That's a good point.
Break down bureaucracy. And, the number of superbosses that set up their office smack in the middle of everyone else. Julian Robertson in the hedge fund business, Bob Noyce, who was the founder of Intel, hated bureaucracy and hierarchy. Jay Chiat from Chiat-Day, big name in advertising, was one of the first people to set up the open office with no one being in an office. Everybody had their own little space, but it wasn't enclosed to enhance interaction. So it turns out superbosses hate these kind of artificial barriers that fall between people, because they love that. I mean, they love to kind of rough it up and mess it up and kind of get involved with other people. They love the give and take. They love people that can push back and challenge and have a different point of view. That they don't just love this. They demand that people have other ideas or new ideas, something to contribute, not just kind of doing whatever you're told. You won't survive working for a super boss. If you get an assignment, you just do exactly what you're told and you're done. Of course, you got to do what the assignment is, but they're looking for people that are going to think about it differently and do something differently. And that sometimes requires a lot of day-to-day interaction between the boss or the super boss and subordinates. So they really do break down hierarchy and bureaucracy. And once you hear that, you got to say, wow, that sounds pretty exciting. I don't want to have to go through 2 or 3 stages and levels and talk to all these assistants to book 30 minutes with my boss 3 weeks from now. I don't want to have to do that. I want to be able to have greater accessibility, and that's what they're trying to do.
You actually make a great point about some super bosses that try to break down hierarchy as well, because I know a lot of executives, chief talent, chief human resource officers that are in the process of doing exactly that, breaking things down. And I realized I forgot to mention, for people that are listening, that you're going to be speaking at our upcoming Future of Work Forum in Chicago, May 9th and 10th, where we're going to talk, I'm sure, much more about this. I can't believe I forgot to mention that. So we're very excited to have you there to talk more about this. And definitely, I think some of these themes will come up with some of these chief talent and human resource officers. Now, another question I have for you is around company size. In other words, do you have to be at a large organization to be a super boss? Can you be a freelance super boss? Maybe you're self-employed and you have a couple of contractors that work for you, or maybe you have a small company with 3 or 5 employees. How does that fit in with the concept of super boss?
Yeah, I think entrepreneurs already are gravitating towards this idea of being a super boss. Even if you've got, a tiny startup, I think it just appeals very closely to what a lot of entrepreneurs. I'm not even thinking necessarily of Silicon Valley entrepreneurs, but that's even a better fit. I had a great conversation with Reid Hoffman, the founder of one of the founders of LinkedIn, and he said this idea is exactly the way the Silicon Valley world thinks about things, and so I think. I think in a bigger company you can do it, but you've got some constraints. I think in the smaller the company, I'd even say the easier it is. And then you even ask, what if you're a freelancer, in the gig economy and you work with different people? Well, here's the thing. To be a super boss requires you to adopt a mindset that says, I'm going to be innovative in how I go about thinking about people and talent and daily interaction with those people. That's something that any one of us could do. I mean, when I'm not doing my executive coaching and consulting and speaking, I'm a teacher and I teach MBA students, and so they're not my employees. But I found that the Superboss playbook or Superboss mindset absolutely informs how I interact with students and even what I do in the classroom. So it's a way of thinking. and it requires a little bit different way of thinking, but it's actually a lot of fun because it gives you license to always be innovative, to always be looking for creative ideas, and to be expecting and demanding that everybody around you thinks the same way. Well, that's got to be music to the ears of every entrepreneur listening to this. So it's definitely not limited to large companies.
Yeah, I'm sure a lot of entrepreneurs listening to this are saying, "Woohoo!"
Mm-hmm.
So I'm glad that you find that as well. Now, there's also been a lot of debate around this concept of management versus leadership, manager versus leader. Are leaders born? Are leaders made? I'm curious to hear where you fall into that kind of mix. Do you distinguish management and leadership and managers and leaders as distinct roles and distinct people?
There are different tasks involved. I think that's true. But as far as distinct people, I think a good boss should, to be successful, has got to have a little bit of the managerial skills and a little bit of the leadership capability. I think they both go hand in hand, and this is quite relevant actually for this conversation about superbosses. To be a manager means you think about efficiency, you think about getting the job done. Of course, you got to do that. If you can't get your job done, you can't be efficient, you can't hit the numbers, then you don't have a job. So you got to be able to do that. The leadership part is one of the greatest ways in which you can actually be more efficient, be more capable by, again, motivating people, by hiring really good people, by creating an environment where you get the most out of your team. And so this ties in closely to Superbosses because it highlights that anyone in an organization can become a superboss. This is not just about the Ralph Laurens and the Lorne Michaels of the world that are these superstar, larger-than-life characters. You could be a supervisor of a couple of people. You could be a middle manager. You could be a sales manager. You could be running an office, a regional plan. It doesn't matter really. As long as you have people around you, you can still be a superboss. And I know this for a fact because as I've started to talk about some of these ideas around superbosses, so many people stop me and tell me, let me tell you about my superboss. I have a superboss right now. And these are people that are not talking about the CEO of their company. They're talking about some job, whatever it is they're doing in some office, in some part of a large or any company for that matter. So management skills, leadership skills are different. But I think a good boss, certainly a super boss, has got to be able to do both of them.
I like that you mentioned that super bosses don't have to be executives. They could be anybody, because I think that's important for people to know that anybody that they work with, when they look around the office, anybody there sitting next to them could potentially be a super boss. And I think that is a very important thing to point out. Now, if you had to say, are super bosses born or are super bosses made? What would you say? Because I'm even thinking, let's say you worked for somebody like a Lorne Michaels or a Larry Ellison. If you, and I don't know if you agree with this, if you grow up, if you don't have that kind of, that attitude, and if you don't have those values instilled in you, can somebody like a Lorne Michaels or a Larry Ellison make you into a super boss, or do you have to have some kind of unlocked potential within you that somebody like a Lorne Michaels or Larry Ellison needs to unlock?
Yeah, it's interesting. I thought about that a lot in talking to all these people in my interviews and the research that I did, and I came to the conclusion that the Superboss playbook, if you will, the stuff that they do is completely learnable or teachable, that you absolutely can. I think you have to be willing. You have to be willing to make the commitment. And it's that mindset thing that we talked about as well. But anyone can do it. And I think and I think whether you're working for Larry Ellison or Lorne Michaels or working for Mary Smith down the hallway, and we all have that potential, and that's because you look at what it is that superbosses do that helps them develop these great people, that helps them be so successful. And you're looking at things that are really concrete. You're looking at things around how to think about hiring talent, how to look at identifying talent a little bit differently. You're talking about motivation. You're talking about inspiration. You're talking about coaching or teaching. You're talking about teamwork. You're talking about building networks. These are completely teachable or learnable skills that you can get. And I'm not going to say it doesn't hurt. Some people are born with certain skills or certain capabilities more than others. That goes without saying. We are who we are when we start off. But just because somebody is more creative or somebody's a more natural leader or somebody is or whatever it is more than we are, doesn't mean we can't get better from wherever we are. And so I think every one of us could become more Superboss-like, or even a Superboss if we really wanted to.
It sounds like we need to make some T-shirts that have SB on it with the little Superman thing, and start handing Superboss T-shirts out. I think that'd be great. What about age and Superbosses? So, are all Superbosses older people? Can you have millennial Superbosses, or how does age play into this at all?
So to find Superbosses from my point of view, which is to say, to try to document whether they exist, who they are, and what they do. I focus specifically on people that have been around for a while, and that is simply because I wanted to see see if they had a track record of building great and developing great talent. So let's put that out there. But does that mean that you have to be doing something, being in business or being a manager or a leader for 20 years or 30 years? No, absolutely not. The Superboss techniques and playbook and ideas that I describe in my book are things you can start picking up from day one. And in fact, you can do it as I said this earlier, as an entrepreneur. It's easier. So again, it's easier for me to see this because I'm trying to document this. That's a different purpose than somebody who wants to be a Superboss. You don't need to document it; you need to do it, and so you could. Does it take years and years of experience? No, you will get better the more you do it. But it's not like you have to be doing this for 20 or 30 years to figure out how to do it. I think you can do it from day one if you really wanted to.
Well, that's definitely a good thing. Ignore my little Yorkie barking in the background. Now, I wanted to jump quickly to this idea of innovation in talent and HR, because that definitely plays into this idea of Superbosses. I also think we're at a very exciting time now when we think about work and the future of work, with HR functions evolving, with new ways to think about talent. So how does that play into Superbosses, and what sort of innovations do you think are coming our way as far as talent and HR?
Great question. I think about innovation, in organizations in a lot of different ways. Just think about where we've seen the most innovation when it comes to any organization, any business. Supply chain management, supply chains totally revolutionized through digital technology and other means. Marketing and sales and manufacturing, pretty much every function in an organization has gone through gigantic innovations, and are just, you can barely recognize them compared to what was around 10 or 20 years ago, maybe even 5 years ago in some cases. And now compare that to HR. Compare that to how we think about talent. We do see innovation there. There's a lot of apps and software that are being created by entrepreneurs that I think are impressive, but I don't think those things by themselves are going to change the equation when it comes to talent. And the reason I say that is when you talk to senior executives in company after company, as I do, and you ask them, what are your pain points? What are you struggling with? The answer you're going to get is exactly the same answer you would have gotten 10 years ago and 25 years ago, and that is talent. We're trying to figure out how to get the best talent. We're trying to figure out how to get more out of them, how to develop them, how to think about managing talent. It's the same issue, which is to say we haven't solved it. We haven't gotten nearly as far in kind of cracking the code on talent as we have in terms of supply chain and marketing and sales and all the rest. And so I think it's time for some for some new ideas and maybe even some counterintuitive ideas. And it's very true that superbosses do things differently than your quote typical manager, your typical leader. They're willing to be. They are more innovative themselves. They focus on close interaction with people that work with them at the same time as they're delegating big jobs to them. They're strong-willed people, but they make room for other big talents. They believe in collaborating and competing at the same time. I mean, they do all these things that historically or traditionally a lot of people think are opposites. They do them at the same time. And I think it's a different model, a different way to think about leadership, to think about talent. And I think we're at a tipping point when it comes to managing and thinking about talent in organizations. We haven't solved it. I don't know that you ever solve it completely, but I don't think we've made as much progress as we need to. But I think the world of HR is starting to come around to that. You know, we have something called the Chief Human Resource Officer title that's becoming quite common, CHRO, that probably too many letters for a good acronym. It's not quite as good as CFO, but it's not bad. But what it does is it elevates the senior HR person to the level of the senior finance person. I think that's exactly right. We're starting to see greater attention to the entire talent function, and I think it's time now to have a major injection of some really new thinking. And I think superbosses, who, by the way, have been hiding in plain sight. I mean, these are people that we all know. We know Ralph Lauren. We know Lorne Michaels. We know George Lucas. We know Larry Ellison. They've been there. But we've never looked at people like that to try to gain insights into kind of the magic that these people do in terms of developing talent, being ultra successful. Well, I've actually spent 10 years trying to figure that out, and I think we've got some new things to say.
And it's funny that you mention roles, because I think we're also seeing chief people officers, chief talent officers. At Airbnb, they have a chief employee experience officer. I'm starting to see these new, I don't want to say, I guess you could call them functions, new functions or roles being developed around this kind of people aspect. That's actually very, very exciting to see, that we're thinking differently about people and talent and evolving this function. So when you say innovations in this space, are you talking about stuff like getting rid of annual employee reviews, flexible work, real-time feedback? Are these the types of innovations that you think we need to see more of?
I like all of those ideas, and I've actually written quite a bit about the dangers of these annual performance reviews and the power of much more immediate feedback. But I'm going beyond that, and here I'm going specifically to the ways in which superbosses develop talent, and they're doing things that. And they've been doing it in some cases for decades with tremendous success, and they're doing it in a little bit different way, or maybe a lot different way than most companies. And I'll give you one really big example. The subtitle of my book is Superbosses, How Exceptional Leaders Master the Flow of Talent. And that's the key component. What that means is that we should be in organizations thinking about not just the intake of talent and how to get great people, which of course we're doing a lot to try to get better at that. And not just the development of that talent, and I think there's plenty more we can do there, but also believe it or not, the outflow. Where are they going to go next? And the problem that I see in so many organizations is this dominance of this idea of talent retention. I get why you want great talent to stay with you. That's kind of a no-brainer. We understand that. But guess what? The best talent might have a different point of view. They might not want to stay working for you forever. In fact, the best people hardly ever want to stay working for you. They want to run their own show, and they have the right to do that. We can't lock them up, and that's that way of thinking is a gigantic innovation. Because you think about a company, think about a big company, that could have 100,000 employees, and they spend all their time. A lot of time hiring people, maybe a little bit less time or a lot less time developing people. But what about thinking about how to manage the flow of that talent through their career progression, and maybe even understanding that maybe they only want to be with us for 5 years. Let's create a situation where they absolutely get everything they possibly can out of those 5 years. We, of course, get way better. And then we continue to interact with them in some way after they leave the nest and go either to a different part of the company or even an entirely different company. That's what superbosses do. That's a radical idea. It's a way of thinking about talent that very few organizations outside of Silicon Valley, I'm going to say, are thinking about today. But I think I think it's absolutely essential. We're going to need to do it because I don't know too many people entering the workforce today that are saying, "I can't wait to last 25 years to get my gold ring." It's not happening.
Yeah, I don't know anybody that says they want to last 25 years either. And I mean, those are great points. And I know you mentioned specifically Silicon Valley. You know that because when you were talking, I was thinking actually. I know a couple of companies that are doing that, but of course they're in Silicon Valley. LinkedIn came to mind, Cisco came to mind, and a few others. Airbnb came to mind, and those are all Silicon Valley, Bay Area companies. So I think that there is something to that idea that Silicon Valley is kind of, helping pioneer some concepts or some themes around this. Because I definitely see some of that happening here, which is great. Now. How does somebody actually become a super boss? And maybe we can frame this in two different ways. So let's say I'm fairly new to the workplace. I don't have that much experience, but I would like to rise to become a super boss. And maybe somebody that already is a manager or an executive, but they want to kind of take that next step. So what advice would you give those two different types of people?
So early on in a career, the best way to become a super boss is to work for a super boss because you're going to get a front row seat on how to do it. And so the question then becomes, how do you find these people? We touched on that a little bit earlier, but I think we could add a couple other things. And that is, especially if you're working in a larger company, there are digital job boards, of course. You can look online and you see where the jobs are available internally for people that want to transfer or change its standard practice. Well, start paying a little bit of attention to that. And in particular, start to pay attention to, say, one office where there never seems to be an opening for very long. I mean, a job opens up and it closes really, really quickly. And it's tough to get in versus another team or another area or region where there's a revolving door and it seems like they always need one or two people. And it's not that they're growing more than the other one. They just can't seem to keep the staff there. Well, I mean, why is that going on? And I'm going to tell you why I think it is going on. I think it's because in the team or the unit where the boss, where it's hard to get in, that boss has become a talent magnet. That boss has become someone that attracts talent because she or he is someone that helps other people get better. They're probably super boss-like, if not actually super bosses. And this other department or area where, there's always a job opening, well, you have a different type of boss there, and it doesn't take long for people to realize, I don't want to be in that world. So you could look at that yourself in any company that has, almost any company that has any size to it will be posting these jobs, and you could find that out. You could also, of course, internally just pay attention. I mean, understand what a super boss does, and then put that lens on that says, let's be on the lookout for who is acting that way, who is behaving that way, who's got people that are moving on to great opportunities, that are going on the fast track, and look for opportunities to try to work for people like that. So you don't have to be passive about this. You can be strategic in trying to find that super boss. So early in your career, that's one of the absolute best things that you can do.
Are there any? So really quick before you jump into the next point, are there any questions that you think people can ask their managers or executives to help determine if they're a super boss, or is it just kind of behavior that you have to observe?
Yeah, well, I think there's a little bit of both, but I think there are questions you could. You could ask your boss, and this is kind of going to maybe sound a little bit odd, but it's in a sense, it's especially when you're interviewing for a job when it's a more natural time to be asking questions and you're expected to ask questions. You should be interviewing your own boss. It's not they're interviewing or your potential boss. It's not that they're just interviewing you. So, what are some of the questions you could ask? Ask about vision. Ask about what type of vision your prospective boss or your boss has for that team. And this is important because vision is not just the word for CEOs or very, very senior executives. It's something that every leader of every team needs to be able to inspire and energize and motivate people with a vision of what they're trying to accomplish. So what is it? I mean, I want to know what it is. I want to understand how that happens. I'd want to know about delegation. How do you delegate? How often do you delegate? How big are you delegating jobs? How much time do you spend coaching people? How much? And this gets back to this question earlier of how are people spending their day? Are they locked up in meetings all day long, or do they have this kind of more free time to interact with different people on the team? And you can't be spending much time coaching people one on one if you're in one meeting. If you're in one meeting after another, you could ask about and pay attention to the extent to which your boss or your prospective boss stays in touch with former employees, former team members that have moved on. There really is, as I said earlier, this bond that forms among Superboss and protege, and among the proteges themselves. And so if there's really no sense of affection or connection, well, that's not definitive, but that's another one of these signs that says maybe this boss doesn't think about it the same way as you'd like her or him to think about it.
Great. I think that's super helpful. And then so the second part of that question is, what do you do if you are a manager or an executive and you want to elevate to being that super boss? What can you do?
Well, a bunch of things. So number one, you could take a page out of the Superboss playbook and just do what Superbosses do. Try it out. For example, one of the things Superbosses do is they don't wait for the job description to be formalized before they start looking for talent. They're always looking for talent. They're talent spotters. So maybe you'd be willing to take a chance on someone you meet. You find someone that looks great, and you don't necessarily have a job for that person or a job description for that person. Have you ever thought about creating a job for that person? It sounds a little bit crazy, and there'll be people in the world of HR that will be aghast at that idea. But that's what Superbosses will do. Of course, you can't do it if you're hiring 1,000 people. That goes without saying. But you can do it selectively, looking for that great talent. What else could you do? I mentioned vision before as something you want to look for. Well, let's see it. If you want to be a Superboss or more of a Superboss, ask yourself this question: are you really inspiring the people on your team to accomplish more than they ever thought they could do? Are you instilling a sense of confidence to that team? I know you're working them hard. I know we're living in a 24/7 world. That's not unusual. But are you adding this other dimension of inspiration and confidence building? And if you're not, why are you not doing that? And I think another thing that a prospective Superboss could do, somebody wants to enhance their Superboss qualities, I think is to work really closely with the best of your talent by doing this, giving them these big responsibilities, this delegation idea again, but also rolling up your sleeves and working hand in hand with them periodically. It's again one of these counterintuitive things that Superbosses do. Many people look at and think about delegation as you're either a big delegator or you're a micromanager, and you're one or the other. And I think that's wrong. I think you should actually think about them as two different things. Big delegator, little delegator. Big micromanager, not really much of a micromanager. As soon as you do that, you say, wow, you know what? I could be a big delegator, and I could be, if not a micromanager, which I'm not going to recommend, but not a hands-off delegator either, but a hands-on delegator that periodically appears, shows up, interacts, drills down deep. And, to be effective in any job, you have to have deep content knowledge. Why wouldn't you want to teach, share, and enhance the learning of the people around you? They're going to produce a better quality product for you in the end by doing that anyway. So those are some of the things you can do to become more like a Superboss. That's
perfect. Now, before we wrap up and talk about where people can get your book and where people can connect with you, actually, do you have any last parting words of wisdom or any themes that you would like to touch on from the book that you don't think we covered?
We covered a lot of ground, Jacob, but if there's one thing I'd add, it's around this idea of millennials in the workforce and all the stuff we hear about that, and employee engagement. They really go closely together. There's two facts. One, millennials are different and entering the workforce in gigantic numbers, and they have different goals. And fact number two, employee engagement scores and the Gallup polls and everything else are abysmal. It's something like 25% of employees in these surveys typically say they're heavily engaged and feel a sense of engagement in the workforce. Well, the Superbosses have come up with what I think to be a pretty impressive solution to that problem. And I think it's one that millennials are going to really gravitate towards, because Superbosses make work engaging by making it important, by giving you as an individual contributor an opportunity to have a big impact, to involve you right from day one. And that's what people want. Certainly millennials want that, but everybody wants that. They want to feel like they're contributing, that that they're having an impact. And the Superboss approach to being a leader does that through all the different ways that we've been talking about, and that I elaborate on, of course, in the book as well. They create these opportunities for people. They roll up their sleeves with people. They give you this opportunity to make things happen. They expect you to come up with new ideas. And that's a playbook for every millennial, and it also improves or enhances engagement on the job. I think that's an important part of the story that we should make sure we highlight as well.
Absolutely. That's a huge theme. Every time I speak with an executive, the conversation of millennials always comes up. The conversation of engagement always comes up. Health and well-being, wellness, all those things are huge factors when we think about the future of work. Maybe one last question for you is, where do you see the future of this? Is your hope that we will create more super bosses within our organizations, and this will lead to more engagement and more desirable places to work?
Imagine a world where people love going to work. Stop right there is enough, right? But imagine that, and imagine a world where individual bosses make it their business to help other people accomplish more, that care about legacy. And imagine a world where individual contributors are so totally engaged and energized and see the opportunity to get better. I mean, it's a fantastic world. And I think that if more of us would adopt more of what the Superbosses have been doing for some time, and that I've really dissected and laid bare in the research and in the Superbosses book, I think if more people did that, we'd be a lot. Not only would organizations be more successful, would we all be more successful in our jobs, but work would become more meaningful and more powerful. And that's really what I'm driving at. It would be great to have more Superbosses, but it would be great even if we didn't call them just Superbosses, but we would engage with and adopt more of what makes Superbosses special, because the side effect of all that is engagement, interest, impact, and importance, and I think that would be a great thing for a lot of people. And that's what I'm hoping. I'm hoping will come out of this book, and a lot of my own work as follow up is absolutely helping organizations get there.
It's a very noble cause. I couldn't agree more, and I definitely hope that we see more of that as well. So where can people go to actually get your book? Where can they connect with you? I know you're on Twitter as well. So where can people find all this good stuff?
Sure. Well, of course, the book's available at your favorite bookseller, obviously at Amazon and Barnes & Noble and everywhere else. You can see lots more about Superbosses on my website, which is cleverly called www.superbosses.com. And I have some downloads there. I have a bunch of articles that I've written that elaborate on Superbosses. Plenty of the booksellers are there. There's a lot of stuff there that's there for the taking. And I'm delighted to engage with listeners afterwards through Twitter. My Twitter handle is @Sid Finkelstein, and that's Sid as in SYD, and Finkelstein is F as in Frank, INKELSTEIN, Sid Finkelstein Twitter handle. And so those are the ways you can find me. And I'd love to hear what people think once they've had a chance to go through the book, read some of the book. And I especially love to hear about people that read the book and say, wow, I have a Superboss now, or I'm going to become a Superboss. And I'd love to hear those stories as well.
Yeah, I bet. I'd love to hear those stories as well. Well, Sydney, thank you very much for taking time out of your day to come speak with me today.
My pleasure, Jacob. Really enjoyed it.
Yeah, likewise. And thanks everybody for tuning into this week's episode of the podcast. My guest has been Professor Sydney Finkelstein, the author of the new best-selling book, Superbosses, How Exceptional Leaders Master the Flow of Talent. He's also the Stephen Roth Professor of Management and Faculty Director for the Tuck Center for Leadership at Dartmouth. And we've been talking about Superbosses, what makes some leaders truly exceptional. I will see you next week. Thanks again for tuning into today's episode. Please remember to rate and review the podcast on Apple Podcasts or whatever your preferred channel is. I cannot express how important those reviews and ratings are to the success of this show, and they keep allowing me to bring back amazing guests. Lastly, don't forget to check out the brand new PDF that I just put out, which looks at the evolution of the employee. In other words, how employees are evolving and changing, and what you as an organization should do to adapt. You'll get a complete breakdown of what that evolution looks like, as well as action items that you can and should be taking. That PDF is available at thefutureemployee.com. And if you want to reach out to me for whatever reason, whether it's inviting me to speak, sponsoring the show, or just giving me some feedback, you can always do so. My email is jacob@thefutureorganization.com. Again, that's jacob@thefutureorganization.com. Thanks again for tuning in, and I will see you next time.